the last two teams to stand on the mountaintop of college football have in common? Top talent. And it's not just those two. There's a trend among champions that our friend Bud Elliott has dubbed the blue chip ratio, a metric that measures, well, how about we just let him explain? So let's welcome in Bud Elliott of the Cover 3 podcast. And we're going to start with that. I'm going to keep the question simple here. What is the blue chip ratio?
Hey, y'all. Yeah, so the blue chip ratio is just kind of a quick and dirty method to figure out like who has done a baseline level of recruiting that could, if everybody stays healthy and the coaching's good and the development's good, allow you to win a national title. And to sum it up, it's pretty clean. Did you sign more in four and 5 stars over the last 4 years than 2 and 3 stars? And everybody since the advent of the BCS has done so. And just I take a look at it. Okay, they're over 50%. They're out. Sorry, most likely not going to happen. And we've had a couple close calls. Maybe somebody might bust it. Ultimately, the Cinderella, the slipper, just gets smashed on that final Monday night. So, yeah, Michigan, another blue chip ratio national champion.
So, Bud, what you're saying is that stars matter. That's the essential argument. The common thought, though, is that programs like Alabama and Georgia and Ohio State are really the only ones involved in the national championship chase because of how they recruit. But obviously, Michigan bucked that trend this past year. How does the blue chip ratio disagree with that idea?
Yeah, so I really look at it as just sort of a minimum level of talent that you need to compete. The idea that we have these super teams and that, it's only it's only Ohio State, it's only Alabama, it's only Georgia. I'm not crazy enough to think that having more talent is a bad thing, but I really do believe once you have a certain kind of minimum threshold of talent, from there, the rest of it mostly comes down to quarterback, coaching, development, culture, staying healthy. All those things matter a lot as well. Once you have a certain minimum level of talent, to kind of go back to SAT prep, this is sort of like a necessary but not sufficient condition. Just because you have it doesn't mean you win it. But if you don't have it, you almost certainly won't win it.
Now, Bud, though, there's different ways to acquire talent now. It's not just through recruiting. So how do you factor in the transfer portal to the blue chip ratio?
So just to keep it consistent over the last 15 years, my official blue chip ratio doesn't use the transfer portal because I'm still trying to figure out, okay, how do these grades that we put on at 24/7 Sports, how do they translate to the draft and what sort of adjustment, what kind of modifier do I need to use to fold it in? But this year I did put out one that had the transfer ratings folded in, which I thought was interesting. And ultimately, guys, it doesn't really change all that much because what we're finding is that your teams that are winning the national title, for the most part, are still made up of really elite high school recruits who stayed healthy and they developed and they hit well. And they're patching some holes through the transfer portal, which I think is probably the best formula. But we'll see. Like maybe an Ole Miss can pop me this year and we'll bust the blue chip ratio. That's probably the number one team to watch there.
But there's so many factors. We just touched on the transfer portal specifically. Is there a way to include that into a metric to potentially predict who has realistic aspirations to win a national championship?
I think if you wanted to make it even more difficult to follow, but also potentially a little bit more accurate, you could probably play with some kind of linear weightings, right? And say, okay, this team has this much talent, this much experience, and also like this amount of age. A lot of these teams that are winning the national title, especially in the era of the COVID super seniors, where we have some of these guys, Washington didn't win it, but they did make it to the title game. They had 6 guys on their roster who were 6th-year players. So if you want to refine it even more, and maybe I'll do that this year, hey, here's the minimum list, here's the teams that I actually think can win it, I'll probably play around with some experience weighting on there.
You don't have to understand it. I mean, if you have been paying attention to the discourse today in the football world, you don't necessarily have to understand the numbers to have a strong take on it. But we will be keeping an eye out for that. Meanwhile, we're expanding to a 12-team playoff this year, and the talk is all about how this is going to give more teams a shot at the title. But as it pertains to this ratio, what does the expanded playoff do to the likelihood that we see a team bust it?
So I think it probably decreases the odds of a true Cinderella actually busting it, because in order to do so, you're probably going to have to win 3 games as opposed to just 2 over teams that have more talent than you do. It allows more teams to get into the dance, but I'm not necessarily sure that it increases the odds of a Cinderella to wear the crown at the end of the dance. And that's kind of a key differentiating factor there. In fact, if you had just taken the playoff ratings and going back over time, 35 more teams would have had a team make the playoff over the last decade or so, which, hey, like that provides hope. We have all these fan bases that want some hope and give them some hope. And the 4-team playoff was pretty exclusionary in that regard. But in terms of actually winning it all, I'm skeptical that it's actually going to increase your chances to win the whole thing.
But more teams will think that they can, and that makes for good television, right, bud?
Hey, we sell hope. I mean, what are recruiting rankings, right? Like, get us up to dream on. You might have gone 4-8 this year, but you signed the number 8 class. Like, you can dream on that. This is hope.
Exactly. That's what this is all about. Hope. Bud, we hope that you'll be back sometime, but thank you for being here today. You can check out more of his work, of course, on the Cover 3 podcast with Chip Patterson, Tom Fornelli, and Danny Cannell. They have been, and they will be, talking college football long after the season is over, so check it out wherever you listen to podcasts.